In a world where biases can turn heroes into villains, two white police officers mistakenly arrest a black FBI agent, believing him to be a criminal. As tensions rise, the agent must navigate the complexities of the justice system while uncovering a web of corruption that extends far beyond the initial mistake. With unexpected allies and shocking revelations, he embarks on a mission to expose the truth and reclaim his dignity. Will he succeed against the odds, or will the system protect its own? Join us on this gripping journey and share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to rate and review. Marcus Adams leaned against the sleek, black sedan parked outside the FBI field office, the city bustling around him. The sun had just begun its ascent, casting a golden hue over the streets of Washington, D.C. This was not just any day. Today marked the culmination of months of tireless investigation into a notorious drug trafficking operation that had been wreaking havoc in the city. Marcus had always believed in justice. Growing up in a neighborhood where crime was as common as the air people breathed, he had witnessed firsthand the impact of violence and despair. He remembered watching his mother struggle to make ends meet after his father left, searching for any semblance of stability in a chaotic world. That struggle had fueled his determination to become an agent of change. His journey had taken him from the dusty streets of his childhood to the hallowed halls of the FBI, where he had carved out a reputation as a dedicated and relentless investigator. As he adjusted his tie, Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He was a black man in a predominantly white agency, and he had worked hard to earn his place. But with that place came scrutiny and skepticism, often from those who didn't know him. His resolve hardened at the thought. He had spent years proving that he belonged, and today would be no different. "Hey, Marcus, you ready for this?" called out his partner, Jenna Lee, as she approached, her ponytail swinging behind her like a banner of enthusiasm. "Always," he replied, a smile breaking through his serious demeanor. Jenna was a no-nonsense agent with a keen intuition and a sense of humor that often lightened the mood in tense situations. They made a formidable team, her analytical mind complementing his instinctual approach to investigations. "Let's get this done and head to that barbecue afterward. I could use a good burger," she said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Just don't challenge me to a hot wing contest again," Marcus replied, shaking his head, remembering how that had ended last time. With their camaraderie easing the weight of the day ahead, they gathered their gear and made their way into the office. The air was thick with anticipation, agents moving about with purpose as they finalized plans for the operation. Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline as he reviewed the briefing materials on the case. The target was a local gang, the Black Hawks, notorious for their ruthlessness and violent methods of enforcing their territory. As the briefing began, Special Agent in Charge Olivia Carter, a seasoned veteran with a reputation for no-nonsense leadership, stood before the team, her presence commanding respect. "This is a critical operation, team. We're looking to dismantle a significant portion of the Blackhawks distribution network. The intel we've gathered indicates they're planning a major shipment today." Marcus listened intently as Olivia detailed the plan, outlining their roles and the risks involved. They would need to coordinate with local law enforcement to ensure their safety and increase the chances of a successful takedown. He felt the familiar blend of excitement and anxiety. This was what he had trained for. "Let's make sure we're all on the same page," Olivia continued, her voice steady and focused. "We do this by the book, no shortcuts. Lives are at stake, including ours. Is that clear?" "Yes, ma'am," the team replied in unison, a chorus of determination. As they dispersed to prepare, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that today would change everything. He was ready to fight for justice, to protect the innocent, and to dismantle the very system that had caused so much pain in his community. Yet as he glanced out of the window at the streets filled with people going about their lives, he felt an undercurrent of tension in the air, a reminder of the societal issues that often went unaddressed. The morning passed quickly, filled with the frenetic energy of preparation. Marcus and Jenna loaded their gear into the car, going over last-minute details. As they pulled out of the parking lot, the excitement was palpable. The streets were alive with the sounds of the city, the honking of cars, the chatter of pedestrians, and the distant wail of sirens. "Marcus, You ever think about what it means to be in this line of work? Jenna asked, her eyes focused on the road. Every day, he replied, contemplating her question. It's about making a difference. But sometimes it feels like we're fighting an uphill battle. For every drug dealer we take down, there are 100 more waiting to fill the void. True, but that's why we keep pushing, right? We can't let the system win, she said, her voice filled with conviction. As they drove, Marcus's mind wandered to the people he had met during his career. The victims of crime, the families torn apart, and the faces of those who had lost hope. He was determined to be a beacon of light in that darkness, but the shadows were always lurking just beyond the edges of his consciousness. Their destination was a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a known distribution point for the Black Hawks. As they arrived, Marcus felt the tension in the air shift, the weight of the impending operation settling heavily on his chest. Agents were already on site, setting up surveillance and preparing for the sting. Let's go over the plan one more time, Marcus said as they met with the team, ensuring everyone was clear on their roles and responsibilities. Each detail was critical. A single misstep could have dire consequences. As the operation unfolded, the adrenaline coursed through Marcus's veins. They moved into position, their hearts racing as they prepared to intercept the gang. The streets outside were busy, oblivious to the storm that was about to break within the warehouse. "Ready?" Jenna whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise of the city. "Ready," Marcus replied, his focus narrowing to the task at hand. But just as the operation commenced, a radio crackled to life, breaking the tense silence. "Units, we've got a situation at the main entrance. Shots fired!" The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. The chaos that followed was a blur. Agents scrambling, commands shouted, and a surge of fear gripping his heart. He and Jenna instinctively moved towards the entrance, determined to protect their team. "Stay close," Marcus called, adrenaline spiking as they approached the chaos unfolding outside. But as they reached the door, they were met not only by gunfire, but by the unmistakable sound of sirens echoing in the distance. It was a cacophony of urgency, signaling that the world outside was collapsing in on itself. Then, without warning, two police officers burst onto the scene, guns drawn, eyes scanning for threats. They spotted Marcus and Jenna, and in an instant, the entire dynamic shifted. "Get down!" one officer shouted, his voice laced with panic. "We're with the FBI," Marcus shouted back, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. But the officers were already on high alert, their training kicking in. "You too, get on the ground," Officer Thomas yelled, his voice echoing in the chaos. "Listen, we're here to help," Marcus pleaded, frustration boiling over. He could feel the tension in the air, the misunderstanding spiraling out of control. But the officers had made up their minds. In the blink of an eye, Marcus felt the cold metal of handcuffs encircle his wrists. "You're under arrest for obstruction," Officer Thomas declared, not bothering to listen to his protests. "No, you've got it wrong. I'm an agent," Marcus shouted, his voice rising above the noise. But his words fell on deaf ears. Jenna's expression shifted from shock to disbelief as she watched her partner being restrained. "Marcus!" she yelled. But before she could move to intervene, she was held back by another officer, her own protests drowned out by the chaos. As they shoved Marcus into the back of the squad car, he felt the weight of the world collapse on him. How had this happened? The fight for justice had turned against him, and he was powerless to stop it. Inside the squad car, Marcus's mind raced. The injustice of the moment felt unbearable. Years of hard work, dedication, and sacrifice reduced to this humiliating experience. He could feel the weight of his badge pressing down on him, a symbol of the very system that had just betrayed him. Through the tinted windows, he could see Jenna speaking with the officers, her gestures animated as she tried to explain the situation. The frantic energy around them contrasted sharply with the stillness he felt in the back seat. A deep sense of injustice washed over him. With each passing moment, his frustration grew. He could see the bystanders gathering, their faces a mix of confusion and curiosity. Some recorded the scene on their phones, capturing a moment that would inevitably become another headline. A black man arrested while simply trying to do his job. The ride to the precinct was a blur of lights and sounds. each passing moment amplifying the chaos that swirled around Marcus. He sat in the back of the squad car, handcuffed and seething with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The officers in the front seat, oblivious to the turmoil inside him, continued their conversation, treating the situation as just another day on the job. "Did you see how he was acting?" Officer Thomas said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Like he owned the place. I don't care what his badge says, he was a threat." "He probably thought he could play the race card," Officer Kelly replied dismissively. "But we've got our orders. If he's acting suspiciously, we have to take him in." Marcus clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to yell at them. The more they spoke, the more he felt the injustice of the moment deepening. He was a federal agent, not a criminal, and yet here he was, shackled like a common felon. The irony gnawed at him. His entire career had been dedicated to upholding the law, and now the very system he served had turned against him. As they arrived at the precinct, Marcus felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. The bustling atmosphere was a stark contrast to his internal turmoil. Officers moved with purpose, their voices filling the air with the urgency of their work. Yet amidst the chaos, he felt invisible, an afterthought in a world that had suddenly become hostile. The officers pulled him from the car, the cold metal of the handcuffs biting into his wrists. Marcus's heart raced as they led him through the front doors of the precinct, the fluorescent lights glaring overhead. He caught sight of a few familiar faces, fellow agents who looked on in disbelief, their expressions a mix of shock and sympathy. "Marcus, what happened?" Jenna rushed forward, her eyes wide with concern. "They've got it all wrong, Jenna," he managed to say, his voice strained. "I was just trying to help." Before she could respond, Officer Thomas interrupted, his tone brusque. "He's being processed for obstruction. No more questions." Jenna's expression darkened as she glanced at Marcus, her worry palpable. "This isn't right," she murmured, but the officers were already leading him away. Here's a detailed continuation of Part 2, focusing on the mistaken arrest of Marcus Adams, the unfolding events, and the emotional and social ramifications that follow. Part 2, the mistaken arrest. The ride to the precinct was a blur of lights and sounds, each passing moment amplifying the chaos that swirled around Marcus. He sat in the back of the squad car, handcuffed and seething with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The officers in the front seat, oblivious to the turmoil inside him, continued their conversation, treating the situation as just another day on the job. "Did you see how he was acting?" Officer Thomas said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Like he owned the place. I don't care what his badge says. He was a threat." "He probably thought he could play the race card," Officer Kelly replied dismissively. "But we've got our orders. If he's acting suspiciously, we have to take him in." Marcus clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to yell at them. The more they spoke, the more he felt the injustice of the moment deepening. He was a federal agent, not a criminal, and yet here he was, shackled like a common felon. The irony gnawed at him. His entire career had been dedicated to upholding the law, and now the very system he served had turned against him. Arrival at the precinct. As they arrived at the precinct, Marcus felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. The bustling atmosphere was a stark contrast to his internal turmoil. Officers moved with purpose, their voices filling the air with the urgency of their work. Yet amidst the chaos, he felt invisible, an afterthought in a world that had suddenly become hostile. The officers pulled him from the car, the cold metal of the handcuffs biting into his wrists. Marcus's heart raced as they led him through the front doors of the precinct, the fluorescent lights glaring overhead. He caught sight of a few familiar faces, fellow agents who looked on in disbelief, their expressions a mix of shock and sympathy. "Marcus, what happened?" Jenna rushed forward, her eyes wide with concern. "They've got it all wrong, Jenna," he managed to say, his voice strained. "I was just trying to help." Before she could respond, Officer Thomas interrupted, his tone brusque. "He's being processed for obstruction. No more questions." Jenna's expression darkened as she glanced at Marcus, her worry palpable. "This isn't right," she murmured, but the officers were already leading him away. The days following Marcus's release from the precinct were a blur of emotions. He returned home to his small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, but the peace he sought was elusive. The walls that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed to echo with the weight of the recent events. Every creak of the floorboards reminded him of the turmoil he had faced, and the shadows in the corners felt alive with doubt and uncertainty. Sitting at his kitchen table, Marcus stared at the stack of case files before him, each one a reminder of the work he had dedicated his life to. The quiet hum of the city outside contrasted sharply with the chaos of his thoughts. He knew he needed to focus on his job, but how could he when the very system he had devoted himself to had turned against him? His phone buzzed, jolting him from his thoughts. It was Jenna, her name flashing on the screen. He hesitated for a moment before answering, uncertain of what to say. "Hey, Marcus. Just checking in. How are you holding up?" Jenna's voice was warm and comforting, cutting through the fog of his anxiety. "I'm managing," he replied, forcing a smile he hoped she could hear through the phone. "Just trying to get back to normal, I guess." "Normal? After everything that happened?" She laughed softly, a sound that was both comforting and jarring. "Marcus, you've been through a lot. It's okay to take some time to process it." "Yeah, but I don't want to fall behind on my cases," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "I need to focus on the Blackhawks case. They're still out there, and we can't let them get away with what they've been doing." "I get that, but you can't just jump back in without addressing what happened," Jenna urged. "You need to take care of yourself first." The truth of her words hung in the air, and Marcus sighed. "I know. It's just hard to shake off the feeling of, I don't know, betrayal. It feels like everything I stood for is crumbling around me." "Don't lose faith in the work we do. It's still important," she reassured him. "Remember, you're not alone in this. We're all behind you, ready to support you." "Thanks, Jenna. I appreciate it," Marcus replied, feeling a flicker of warmth in his chest. "Let's meet up later this week. We can go over the case together and brainstorm our next steps," she suggested. "Sounds good. I'll text you when I'm ready," he agreed, grateful for her unwavering support. As he hung up the phone, Marcus felt a sense of resolve starting to build. He knew he couldn't allow himself to be defined by the mistakes of others. He was still an agent, still committed to fighting for justice. He would find a way to move forward. As the days turned into weeks, Marcus dove back into work with a renewed determination. He threw himself into the investigation of the Black Hawks, hoping to drown out the echoes of his recent ordeal. The gang's operations were extensive, and he knew that each step they took to dismantle it brought him closer to reclaiming his sense of purpose. However, the fallout from his arrest was far from over. The incident had made headlines, and Marcus found himself the subject of speculation and gossip within the department. Whispers followed him in the hallways, and some colleagues avoided eye contact, their discomfort palpable. "Did you hear what happened with Agent Adams?" he overheard one agent say to another as he passed by. "I can't believe he got himself arrested. What a mess." Marcus's heart sank at the words. He had always been proud of his reputation within the Bureau, but now he felt like a pariah. It was infuriating, knowing that he had been wrongfully accused yet facing the scrutiny of those who didn't know the whole story. That evening, as he returned home from a long day at the office, Marcus flipped on the news, hoping for some distraction. He sat on the couch, his eyes glued to the screen as a familiar face appeared, Detective Ramirez addressing the camera. "We are committed to ensuring accountability within our police force," Ramirez stated, his voice steady. "The recent incident involving Agent Marcus Adams has sparked a necessary conversation about racial bias and the need for reform." Marcus leaned forward, intrigued yet wary. The detective continued, detailing the investigation into the officers involved and the steps being taken to address systemic issues within the department. A sense of hope blossomed within him as Ramirez spoke about the need for change. Maybe this could be the catalyst for progress after all. But as the segment concluded, the tone shifted. A news anchor appeared, her expression somber. "The incident has raised questions about the relationship between law enforcement and minority communities. Community leaders are calling for an investigation into systemic racism within the department, citing this as a clear example of the issues that persist in our society." Marcus's heart raced. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about something much larger. He felt a sense of urgency coursing through him. If he could use his experience to shed light on these issues, maybe he could help enact real change. The next morning, Marcus met with Jenna at their favorite cafe. He had reached out to her with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to discuss the Blackhawks case and how they could move forward. "Good to see you," she said, her eyes lighting up as he approached. "How are you feeling today?" "Better, actually," he admitted, sliding into the seat across from her. "I think I've finally accepted that I can't control everything. I need to focus on what I can do, and right now that means taking down the Blackhawks." "Exactly," Jenna replied, nodding in agreement. "We've got a solid plan in place, and we can't let anything distract us. But we also need to address the bigger issues at play." Marcus took a deep breath, preparing to share his thoughts. "I've been thinking about how my experience can be part of a larger conversation about racial bias in law enforcement. If we can use this to push for reform, it could make a real difference." Jenna's eyes widened in surprise. "You want to go public with your story?" "I think it's necessary," Marcus replied, his voice firm. "I want to work with community leaders, activists, anyone who can help amplify this message. We need to address the systemic issues that led to my arrest." "Count me in," Jenna said without hesitation. "We can gather support from within the Bureau and the community, but we have to be strategic about it." Marcus nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. "Let's start by reaching out to the local organizations that focus on police reform. I want to meet with community leaders, hear their concerns, and find out how we can help." As they sipped their coffee, Marcus began to outline a plan for how they could mobilize support. He thought about the allies he had within the Bureau and the connections Jenna had cultivated in the community. Together, they could create a coalition dedicated to fostering change. Over the next few weeks, Marcus and Jenna worked tirelessly to build a coalition. They reached out to community organizations, activist groups, and influential leaders, inviting them to a meeting to discuss the issues at hand. Marcus wanted to ensure that their approach was inclusive, recognizing the voices that had long been silenced. On the day of the meeting, Marcus stood at the front of a community center. A diverse group of people gathered before him. The room buzzed with energy, a mixture of hope and determination palpable in the air. He glanced around at the faces, activists, concerned citizens, and leaders from various organizations, each one representing a piece of the larger puzzle. "Thank you all for being here today," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in his stomach. "I know we all share a common goal to address the systemic issues within our law enforcement and create a safer, more equitable community for everyone." As he spoke, he could feel the weight of their shared experiences pressing in on him. He recounted his own story, the wrongful arrest, and the frustrations that had followed. With each word, he felt a sense of liberation, as if shedding the burden of shame he had carried for too long. After he finished speaking, a woman stood up, her expression fierce and determined. "My name is Sarah Williams, and I've been advocating for police reform in this community for years. Thank you for sharing your story, Marcus. We need more voices like yours to stand with us." The room erupted in applause, and Marcus felt a surge of hope. This was the moment he had envisioned, a united front pushing for change. Throughout the meeting, various speakers shared their experiences with law enforcement, each story echoing the same themes of discrimination, fear, and the urgent need for reform. As they brainstormed ideas, the energy in the room grew more electric. They discussed strategies for raising awareness, mobilizing the community, and engaging local leaders to advocate for change. In the weeks that followed, the coalition gained traction. Marcus and Jenna coordinated rallies, community forums, and workshops aimed at educating the public about their rights and the systemic issues within law enforcement. They used social media to spread the word, amplifying their message and reaching a wider audience. Marcus felt invigorated by the work they were doing. Each event was a testament to the power of community and collaboration. The support they received from local organizations and residents fueled his determination, reminding him that change was possible.